Welcome to another monthly portfolio update. If you are stopping by for the first time, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. In this video, I will share with you how much I invested in my taxable account in January, how many shares I bought, and the value of my portfolio at the end of January. But as always, before I continue, a quick disclaimer. The information that I'm sharing is not financial advice. Before you invest in anything, please do your own research and make sure that you only invest in things that you understand. With that being said, I will dive right into my portfolio update. I will start with a quick recap of my December 2025 portfolio to show you the value of the portfolio and how many shares I had before the beginning of 2026. The total value of my portfolio at the end of December was $118,561.95. $118,558.50 was the market value of my investments, and $3.45 was a cash amount. At the end of December, the total unrealized profit of my portfolio was $37,983.79. This was plus 47.14%. These are my holdings: 2 Vanguard ETFs and 2 BlackRock ETFs. VCN is a Vanguard ETF that tracks the Canadian market. I had 116 shares of VCN at the end of December. VFV is a Vanguard ETF that tracks the S&P 500 index. This is the Canadian version of a VOO. I had 365 shares of VFV at the end of December. XEQT is a BlackRock ETF. This is an all-in-one equity ETF, which holds Canadian equities, US equities, developed market equities outside of North America, and emerging market equities. If you want to hold a single equity ETF which is globally diversified, you might consider looking into XEQT or its Vanguard equivalent, VEQT. I had 650 shares of XEQT at the end of December. XUU is a BlackRock ETF that tracks the US total stock market, and I had 355 shares of XUU at the end of December. I will now show you how much I invested in January and how many shares I bought. I bought 2 shares of VCN. The cost per share was $66.83. The total cost, $133.66. This is 8% of the amount that I invested in January. I bought 5 shares of VFV. The cost per share was $169.70. The total cost, $848.51. This is 49% of the amount that I invested in January. I bought 10 shares of XEQT. The cost per share was $41.04. The total cost, $410.38. This is 24% of the amount that I invested in January. I bought 5 shares of XUU. The cost per share was $69.98. The total cost, $349.89. And this is 20% of the amount that I invested in January. In total, I bought 22 shares, all the ETFs combined. And the amount that I invested in January was $1,742.44. This is $21.83 more than the amount that I invested in December. As you can see, in December, I invested $1,720.61, and in January, I invested $1,742.44. The difference is plus $21.83. The total value of my portfolio at the end of January was $121,339.06. $121,331.16 was the market value of my investments, and $7.90 was a cash amount. At the end of January, the total unrealized profit of my portfolio was $39,014.01. This was plus 47.40%. As of January 31st, I had 118 shares of VCN, 370 shares of VFV, 660 shares of XEQT, and 360 shares of XUU. Alright, let's now take a look at some quick details about each of the positions. I will start with a VCN. The closing market price on January 31st was $64.92. The quantity of shares that I had, 118. The average price, $43.19. The book value, which is how much I have invested in VCN, was $5,096.96. The market value was $7,660.56. This was 6.31% of my portfolio. The total unrealized profit for VCN was $2,563.60. This was 50.30%. Next, we have VFV. The closing market price on January 31st was $167.64. The quantity of shares that I had, 370. The average price, $111.51. The book value was $41,260.44. The market value was $62,026.80. This was 51.12% of my portfolio. The total unrealized profit for VFV was $20,766.36. This was 50.33%. Then we have XEQT. The closing market price on January 31st was $40.65. The quantity of shares that I had, 660. The average price, $28.50. The book value was $18,812.77. The market value was $26,829. This was 22.11% of my portfolio. The total unrealized profit for XEQT was $8,016.23. This was 42.61%. Finally, we have XUU. The closing market price on January 31st was $68.93. The quantity of shares that I had, 360. The average price, $47.63. The book value was $17,146.98. The market value was $24,814.80. This was 20.45% of my portfolio. The total unrealized profit for XUU was $7,667.82. This was 44.72%. The stock market started 2026 on a positive note. My portfolio went from being up 47.14% at the beginning of January to 47.40% at the end of January. This is an increase of 0.26%. And the amount that I invested in January was $1,742.44. As for the S&P 500 index, it gained 1.37% in January. January has historically been one of the strongest months of the year for US equity returns. There is a theory called the January effect, which is a tendency for stocks to rise in the first month of the year. Investors have generally attributed this rally in January to the rise in buying that follows the price drops that typically happens in December. If you recall, the S&P 500 index ended December minus 0.05%. However, it's important to note that this phenomenon doesn't happen every year. Sometimes January ends up with negative returns. There is a similar theory derived from the stock market performance in January called the January barometer. This theory refers to the fact that the S&P 500's calendar year performance has matched the direction of January returns nearly 77% of the time. This means when the S&P 500 index rises in January, full-year return tends to be positive. And when the index falls in January, full-year returns tend to be negative. This has led some investors to believe that when it comes to stock market performance, as goes January, so goes the year. Again, this direct relationship between January and full-year market returns happened only about 77% of the time. It did happen the past 3 years. In 2023, the S&P 500 was up 6.18% in January, and the full-year return was 26%. In 2024, the S&P 500 was up 1.59% in January, and the full-year return was 23.30%. In 2025, the S&P 500 was up 2.70% in January, and the full-year return was 17.90%. This January, the S&P 500 returned 1.37%. Does this mean the full-year return for 2026 will be positive? The answer is no one really knows for certain. The January barometer theory has worked 77% of the time and failed the other 23% of the time. Based on these stats, there's a high chance that it works. But as they say, past performance doesn't guarantee future results. For long-term investors, what is important is to invest every month consistently and to stay the course. You may end up doing better than most people over time. Alright, feel free to leave a comment below. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time with another update. Peace out.